There's this ridiculous rule that exists in my family where if my older sister Magda isn't dating anyone, then I can't either. Well, it sucks. But I decided I was going on a date anyway. I planned it perfectly. My sister was holed up in her room, and my dad was working late. I wore one of my mom's old slinky dresses and used her perfume. If she were still alive, she'd let me date. I know that for sure. Anyway, I looked good and I knew Jeremy would think so too. We met online and he had been dying to go on a real date with me for months. And our first date went so well. We kissed in the back row of the movies. Then he said he had a surprise for me. At the end of the date, he took me to an abandoned building that had an amazing view. As we looked out at the view, he leaned in to kiss me. And then the next moment, I felt my phone vibrating. It was my dad. Oh no! But it gets worse. I picked up because he kept calling, and when he asked where I was, I told him I was studying at my friend Casey's. Then he said, "Oh, really? Since when does Casey live on a rooftop? And since when is Casey a boy with his hands all over you?" I froze, and then I ducked down. Oh my gosh, was my dad following us? "Eleanor, you get home right now before I come over there and show that boy a piece of my mind. Next time you choose to disobey me, don't choose a building opposite my office." Then he hung up. I peered over the edge, and sure enough, there was my dad, standing in the middle of his office, staring at me with his arms crossed. I was in deep trouble. Not only was I not allowed to date again, I was also grounded, pretty much for life. Why did my life have to suck this much? My dad reminded me of his stupid rule, and I glared at Magda. I asked her why she couldn't be normal and get a boyfriend for once. But she just laughed and said all boys were jerks and then slammed her door. I missed Jeremy so much. He didn't even go to the same school as me, so it's not like I could even see him there. But eventually, I hatched a plan. I had no idea if it would work, but it was worth a try. I created a fake account on Instagram and then sent my sister a message. I didn't expect her to reply, so I was totally shocked when she did. And for like an hour, we talked back and forth, and she even sent me a selfie, and she was wearing lipstick. I had to try hard not to laugh, and I went to knock on her door, and she shouted at me that she was busy. Yep, busy texting this fake guy, aka me, I thought to myself. Ha! For a few days I played along, pretending I was this mysterious, gorgeous guy. But then, of course, my sister asked if they could meet up. What now? I started to panic. I told her I was busy, but she kept asking. It honestly made me feel kind of sorry for her. Was she that desperate? So I called Jeremy and asked for a favor. I begged Jeremy to pretend to be this guy I'd made up and go meet my sister for a date. He wasn't up for it at all. But I said it would mean we could see each other again. All he had to do was go out on a date with her. And then surely my dad would let me go out on dates again too. Surefire plan, right? The night of her date, I got a knock on my door. It was my sister asking if she could borrow a pair of heels. I almost spat my drink everywhere. My sister in heels? I gave her a smirk and said, "Who is he? Come on, spill." But she just threw a pillow at me and said it was none of my business. I couldn't wait to hear how the date went, and Jeremy had promised to text me all through the date. But he didn't. So when I finally heard the front door, I called him. I was kinda angry, but he said not to worry, that it all went well, and Magda was interested in a second date. That wasn't part of the plan, though. At breakfast the next morning, my sister looked all loved up. It made me feel a bit sick, actually. Dad could tell straight away that she'd met someone. And when she asked him if she could go on a second date, I quickly piped in and said, now I could date too. But then the worst news ever. My dad said I could only date if it was a double date with Magda. How the heck would we do that? I called Jeremy and told him this stupid dilemma, and he said his mate Brad would come along to be my date. This was so unfair. What had I done? But I guess it was better than nothing. It was so awkward. The four of us were in this restaurant, and Jeremy sat next to my sister, and she kept reaching out and touching his face. I'd never seen her like this before. But then Jeremy was playing footsie with me under the table and kept winking at me whenever Magda wasn't looking. After 30 minutes of watching Magda flirt with him nonstop, I couldn't take it. I went to the bathroom, and when I came back out, Jeremy was standing there saying, "Sorry, babe." I accused him of flirting with my sister, and he was like, "Babe, I'm a good actor. What can I say?" But I wasn't happy. Jeremy was my boyfriend. We came back from the bathroom together, and my sister looked angry and reached out and planted a huge kiss on Jeremy's cheek. Yuck. Then when we got home that night, she started shouting at me, accusing me of flirting with her lover. She said he was coming over the next day to watch movies and that I should keep out of their way and leave her boyfriend alone. I couldn't believe it. Since when did she think that he was her boyfriend? I told Jeremy he had to break up with her, or I'd tell her what was going on, and he'd never see me again. He promised to do it the next day. After like 30 minutes of them watching a movie, my sister was zonked out on the couch, and Jeremy tiptoed over towards me. Then we went up to my room and spent some time hanging out. He said he'd break up with her when she woke up, but then we heard the front door. My dad was home. Oh no! Jeremy climbed out of my window and ran across the backyard to the gate, and I ran into the bathroom pretending I'd been taking a bath. That's when I saw it. In the trash can was a pregnancy test. What on earth? I scooped it out and dropped it in shock when I realized it was positive. Was my sister pregnant? But how? Suddenly all kinds of thoughts were running through my mind. Was the baby Jeremy's? I have no idea why I did what I did next, but I'll probably regret it for a long time. I took a pic of the test and sent it to Jeremy. I waited with bated breath for him to reply, but he didn't. I'd lost him, and it was all my fault. Part of me was praying that my sister was pregnant with someone else's baby. But later that night, my biggest fears came true. I heard her on the phone, and she was telling Jeremy because I heard her saying his fake name, Joe, the name I'd come up with. I didn't know what to do. On the one hand, it was all my fault because I'd come up with this ridiculous idea. But on the other, it was all Jeremy's fault. He was only supposed to act, not actually fall in love with my sister. I suddenly felt so angry. I could hear my dad pottering around in the kitchen, so I stormed down there and showed him the test. Then I told him Magda was knocked up and that it was my boyfriend Jeremy who did it. My dad looked like he was about to faint. And then Magda walked in and started screaming at me, saying I was jealous. And I had always been. And why couldn't I just let her have this one thing? So I told her everything. That I'd made Joe up. That he didn't actually exist. That Jeremy had pretended to be Joe. She looked like she wanted to puke. And then she was crying and saying she had to get rid of the baby. And my dad looked at me and said I was cruel. And that there must be something seriously wrong with me to play a trick like this. I felt so ashamed of myself. All of this because I wanted to have a boyfriend. Not only had I lost my boyfriend, I'd lost any chance of my sister ever wanting to speak to me again. I ran up to my room, packed a bag, and snuck out. No one even noticed because my dad was so busy lecturing my sister. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew I had to get out of there. I couldn't live with what I'd done. My sister was pregnant with a baby that came from a web of deceit and lies. I was a monster. I wandered the streets for a bit, and I wanted to go back home, but I knew I wouldn't be welcome there. I even thought about going to Jeremy's, but he was as much to blame for this as I was. In the end, I went to a shelter for teens, and they said I could stay for free and return for some work. So that's how I wound up helping out in a foster and adoption home for babies that the shelter also owned. And I loved it. Before I knew it, a few years had passed. And there was this one baby that I'd watched grow up into a 2-year-old. It made me think about Magda and whether or not I had a niece or nephew running around out there. So I tried to track them down. They'd moved, and I'd sold my phone back when I was first homeless, so I'd lost their numbers. One of the guys at the foster home asked me what I was Googling, and I told him, and he said the name sounded familiar. Hang on! Then he ran to the filing cabinet and pulled out a file with my sister's name on it. I couldn't believe it. My sister had given up her baby for adoption. And then I realized the baby I had watched turn into a cute 2-year-old, little Charlie, he was my nephew. No wonder I'd felt such a connection with him. I was shaking as I picked up the phone to call my sister. Would she hang up on me? When she answered and I heard her voice, I started sobbing. I told her it was me, and soon she was crying too. She asked what I was doing at the adoption agency, and I told her I worked there. Well, 1 hour later, she pulled up outside, and her and my dad came running towards me. They apologized for abandoning me, even though it was me who had left them. Then my sister started looking around, and she was wondering if her son was still there. When she saw him, she burst into tears and kept saying it was the second biggest mistake she'd ever made, giving her baby away. The first mistake being her fake relationship with Jeremy, which had ruined our sister bond. Now we're reunited, but I still work at the adoption agency. I love it there. As for Charlie, it's quite complicated, as my sister can't get him back after putting him up for adoption. But I can. So now I'm in the process of adopting my nephew, and then we can all be a happy family again. Oh, and we never heard from or spoke to Jeremy again. That's all in the past now.